The JBL Wrestling God recap. No reason to say something twice. JBL Wrestling God, exact same thing. I forever and for always will be the only wrestling God. And yes, that is a dead animal behind me. If you saw the news today, you saw that I saved a lot of lives when this crazy wild zebra escaped from the Central Park Zoo and I clotheslined it, saving no telling how many children's lives that were on a field trip. Gave the meat away to homeless people, actually cooked it for them, and now I've got it up here right now drying because I'm going to make a pair of boots for Big Show. It's how I roll. I'm just a good guy. When I was in Waterloo, Iowa, I picked up this book about Gorgeous George. And bringing up Waterloo, Iowa and the Dan Gable Museum, one of the greatest places I've ever been. I don't want to give anything away, but I did see this exact replica of Charlie Haas's head all the way down to the hairline. So next year's class, I don't know. Don't want to give anything away. Kayfabe. Congratulations, Chuck. Well-deserved honor. On to the toast of the coast, the sensation of the nation, the human orchid, Gorgeous George. Once George Wagner became the biggest superstar of the biggest era in professional wrestling. I think there were three great eras, 1948 to 1955. 24 million Americans went to watch pro wrestling in 1950. Only 17.5 million went to watch pro baseball. I believe that era was probably the greatest, followed by the two other eras, which are hard to compare because it's hard to compare eras, the Attitude Era and the Hulk Hogan era. But comparing villains, heels, between generations, I think is almost impossible. I recently saw a list that put Hot Rod, Roddy Piper, #1. There's been some wonderful heels in the past century. I have no problem with Hot Rod being #1. Great friend of mine, much respect for the Hot Rod. See, #1? Very well could be, well deserved. And if he's not, he's certainly in the top 5. But putting Gorgeous George #9 is a crime, is a wrestling felony. Gorgeous George was the highest paid athlete in the 1950s. Gorgeous George is the guy who took Cassius Clay aside and said, "You're pretty, you got good hands, but you got to create a scene." Gorgeous George that night went out with Classy Freddie Blassie with Cassius Clay in attendance. 15,000 people. 3 days later, Cassius Clay fights his 10th fight. His 10th pro fight after winning a gold medal, drew less than 500. He realized at that point Gorgeous George was right. He later became Cassius X and then became Muhammad Ali and became the greatest of all time. And he credits his entire popularity rise and his drawing ability to one person, and that is Gorgeous George. Gorgeous George, first one to dye his hair blonde. Later followed by another great heel, the Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers, who, by the way, Howard Finkel, do you know this piece of trivia? Got his name from the old Nat King Cole song, also sung by Frank Sinatra in 1948, Nature Boy. And long before the Nature Boy and the Four Horsemen were styling and profiling, Gorgeous George was driving around the country in an orchid-painted limousine by his man Jeffries. Jeffries was once played by the top comedian of the time, Bob Hope. Gorgeous George came upon this idea from Lord Lansdowne. He's going to wear a robe. He's going to dye his hair blonde. He's going to start becoming this almost effeminate but very tough. Gorgeous George was never an overtly gay character. It was always a character that was gray. So you had women that loved Gorgeous George. He said, "I've been in more beauty parlors than any woman alive." You had men that hated Gorgeous George, but also had to respect Gorgeous George because he was that good of a wrestler. A truly transformative character. Sold out arenas all over the world. His last great match at Los Angeles against the Destroyer loses a hair versus mask match. Gorgeous George, I think, had to be, arguably, the greatest heel of all time. If not, probably the greatest character in pro wrestling. There you have it. Your JBL Wrestling God. There I go repeating myself again. Recap. Book review. LayfieldReport.com. Sign up for the newsletter.